So, from our point of view, what we saw more and more is that piracy is a result of bad service on the part of game companies.
Yes, I go back and play older games all the time. So I wish, these games that we're getting nowadays were preserved a little bit better for future generations and for me, if I want to go back and play them from time to time. You shouldn't have to buy remasters and remakes just to keep content that you've already paid for.
I really believe all of these efforts made by shutting down emulators, which is what we're about to talk about in detail when it comes to Nintendo, and all of these other DRM efforts and all kinds of anti-piracy measures do nothing but make more people want to pirate it, because you're now ruining the official means of getting these products and making it far more easy, convenient, and complete actually owning the product through piracy. So you're making it a more appealing option for them. So you're creating more problems than you're solving in the first place.
You can only buy off of their storefronts, you can only play on their hardware, and then you buy the next one, they take away the old one, and this happens every generation. So in that case, where you literally do not have ownership over anything, your only option to play games will always eventually lead to piracy.
Piracy is not theft. Copyright laws kinda suck. DRM sucks more. And I can get a better experience in some games through piracy because of it. Pirating games is the only way to preserve many of them. It's the only way some people can play most of them. And while it doesn't conclusively hurt profits, fighting against it has certainly hurt consumers.
Subscribe to CryoJustin on YouTube!
Oh! Big thank you to my friend Ryan who gave me my new intro for my channel going forward. If you're around my age, you remember the commercials of you wouldn't steal a car, you wouldn't steal a handbag, so you wouldn't steal a movie, or something along those lines. And people always thought of piracy as this really evil thing. Now, to an extent that was true, especially back then, because if you tried to steal anything, you would have cops at your house in literally 5 seconds. But piracy has gone through a weird revolution where piracy is sort of needed to preserve video games. And before we start, I just want to give a disclaimer. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not anything of a legal expert. If you take my advice, do it at your own peril, because I'm not going to be responsible for it. This is purely for entertainment purposes only. But with that being said, let's get into the video. One of the greatest pastimes that someone who loves video games can do is go back and play the games that they grew up with. But with video games fading away, it seems harder and harder as the years go on. The memories tied to those games, the excitement firing up a console after school, the joy of discovering hidden levels, or the frustration of a near impossible boss fight are becoming harder to relive. As systems break down and games become unavailable, what once felt internal now feels like it's slipping away. It's not just about nostalgia, it's about preserving the stories, the creativity, and the cultural impact these games had on a generation. Without proper preservation, an entire chapter of our digital heritage risks of being lost forever, leaving future generations without a way to experience the magic that shapes so many of us today. Video games are one of the most important cultural phenomena over the last 50 years, but they're disappearing, at least commercially speaking. Let's say you wanted to buy a game from a couple of decades ago, maybe something you heard about on Reddit or a gaming forum. Odds are, you're out of luck. A recent study looked at games from platforms like PlayStation 2, the Game Boy, and even the Commodore 64. The findings? Only 13% of those classic games are still available to buy, and the older the system, the worse it gets. Just 3% of Commodore 64 games are still commercially accessible to this day. Sure, you might think, well duh, old stuff doesn't stick around forever. And that's true to a point. Hardware becomes obsolete, rights get tangled up, and companies shut down. But video games are disappearing at a shocking rate. They're vanishing faster than silent films or old radio shows, despite these forms being over a century old, while many video games are only a few decades past their prime. This is a big deal, especially for scholars. How can gaming historians study and document the cultural impact of games if they can't even access them? It's the same challenge comic book scholars faced years ago when libraries didn't take comics seriously and never bothered to preserve them. Now the same thing is happening with video games. But it's not just a problem for academics, everyday gamers want to access these titles too. When Digital Eclipse released Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Cowabunga Collection, a bundle of 13 retro games, it sold over 1 million copies in a year. That proves that demand is still there. People want to experience these games again, or for the first time. So why isn't the industry stepping up? There are a few reasons. Sometimes it's a technical issue. Porting old games to modern systems can be costly and time consuming. Figuring out who even owns the rights to a 30-year-old game can be like untangling Christmas lights. And honestly, sometimes the companies just don't care. But here's where it gets interesting. Piracy has been quietly stepping in to fill the gap.
There be treasure!
not that piracy. Nearly 30 years ago, emulators started popping up. One of the first was MAME, Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator, which could mimic old arcade cabinets. Writing emulator software is perfectly legal. It's just code that imitates old hardware, but copying and distributing the actual game files, known as ROMs, that's a copyright violation. Still, people did it anyway. By the late 90s, forums were buzzing with gamers sharing ROMs of their favorite classics. That's how many people replayed the original Mario Bros. From 1983, where you could fight creatures crawling out of pipes and promptly disappeared from social life for weeks. As time went on, emulators for consoles like PlayStation and Nintendo 64 emerged, and ROM sharing exploded. Today, there are websites where you can find thousands of games long abandoned by their original publishers. These digital pirates have essentially become the unofficial archive of gaming history. It's not just nostalgia driving this, there's a whole cultural ripple effect. Indie developers, for example, are embracing retro aesthetics, those chunky, pixelated 8-bit and 16-bit vibes, because they were inspired by games that they accessed through emulators. Plus, people will pay for the stuff if it's offered legally. Look at the success of those plug-and-play consoles loaded with retro Namco or Bandai games. But here's the kicker. Most classic games aren't available to buy, anywhere. So, for many fans, it's either piracy or nothing. Now, emulators aren't perfect. They miss some of the magic of the original experience. For example, playing Missile Command on the emulator isn't quite the same without that huge inertia, heavy trackball controller. And the visuals? Old games were designed for CRT monitors, which gave them a soft, glowy look that modern HD screens just can't replicate. For academics, this is a real challenge. If you want to study or showcase an old game, you need to either track down the original hardware or navigate a legal minefield to get the permission to use an emulated version. And even then, good luck figuring it out. But for the rest of us gamers who just want to revisit the classics and keep them alive in our cultural lives, piracy has been the unlikely hero. The gaming industry has dropped the ball when it comes to preserving its own history, and like it or not, pirates have been there to catch it. But first off, why is this all happening in the first place? Video games for older consoles are becoming harder and harder to find, and it's honestly kind of heartbreaking. Think about all those classic systems like the NES, the PlayStation 2, or the Game Boy. They're not being made anymore, and as years go by, the ones that are still out there are breaking down. Replacement parts, forget it, those stopped being made ages ago. So even if you got an old cartridge or disc lying around, it's basically a paperweight if the console itself doesn't work. The real kicker though, is that the gaming industry seems to not care. Publishers are so focused on pumping out new games that they've pretty much abandoned their older stuff. Sure, porting a classic game to modern consoles costs time and money, but it's like they don't even try unless it's a guaranteed hit. And even when they do, there's always some sort of legal mess that happens. A lot of the older games have licensed music or characters, and once those contracts expire, re-releasing the game becomes a nightmare. Then these games are made by companies that don't even exist anymore. Good luck figuring out who owns the right to those. And don't get me started on the digital side of things. We've shifted so much to the online gaming and downloads, but most of these older games never made it to digital stores. Even when they did, a lot of those stores like the Wii Shop channel have shut down. So now, even if you're willing to pay for a digital copy, you're out of luck. And physical media isn't any better. Cartridges corrode, discs get scratched, and once they're gone, they're gone. Meanwhile, collectors are hoarding what's left and driving up prices. So good luck trying to afford that rare game that you loved as a kid. And it's not just about the games themselves. Playing them the way that they were meant to be played is almost impossible now. Remember those old CRT TVs? Games were designed for those fuzzy, glowing screens, and they don't even have the same look on modern HD TVs. The entire experience is tied to the hardware, and when that hardware disappears, so does the part of the magic. What's worse is how little effort we actually put into preserving video games as a culture. Libraries and archives didn't take games seriously for years, and now tons of early titles are just gone. The industry itself doesn't seem to value its history either. And yes, while some companies release remakes or reboots, they're rarely true to the originals. They might be fun, but they're not the same. They don't hit you with that wave of nostalgia that the real thing did. It's frustrating because video games aren't just entertainment, they're a part of culture, it's a part of history. Yet, it seems like we're letting them fade away. Without some serious effort to preserve these games and make them accessible again, we're losing more than just pixels on a screen. We're losing the stories, the creativity, and the memories tied to them. And once they're gone for good. And there's multiple companies falling victim to these practices. Look at Sega shutting down about 60 of its classic games, stuff from the Master System, Genesis, Saturn, the kind of games that built the foundation for many of us who grew up gaming. Starting December 6th, those titles are being pulled from digital storefronts, and if you didn't already buy them, you're out of luck. If you do owe them, don't worry, you'll still have access in your library, but that's about it. They're just gone for everyone who didn't get there in time. Now, Sega hasn't exactly come out and say why they're doing this. Maybe it's part of some grand plan to repackage and resell them later in shiny new collections, like they've done before with Sonic and other franchises. But it's the same playbook. Delist the originals, then drop a quote-unquote remastered bundle so that they can sell them to us all over again. And yeah, fine. Business is business. But it still stings to see these classics vanish from the marketplace. It's not even just Sega doing this though. Look at what's happening with Ubisoft and The Crew. They're facing a class action lawsuit right now because they decided to shut down the servers for that game. Two gamers in California are basically saying, hey, you didn't tell us that one day you flipped the switch and the game we paid for will be unplayable. And honestly, they've got a point. When you buy a game, especially a live service one, there's this unspoken assumption that it will stick around for a while. But here we are, with games disappearing and players are left holding the bag. It's the same story over and over. Companies are so focused on the next big move that they're forgetting about the value of preserving what's already out there. Whether it's Sega pulling games or Ubisoft pulling servers, it feels like gamers are the ones losing everything. These aren't just products, they're pieces of gaming history that we're going to repeat over and over. And it's our history. And every time a game vanishes, it's like a little piece of that history gets erased. It's frustrating, and honestly, it's sad. While those are the most recent examples, let's talk about how gaming companies just keep pulling the plug on older games. Take Forza Horizon 4 as an example. Microsoft announced that it's getting delisted from every online platform, Steam, the Microsoft Store, you name it, by December 14th in 2024. If you already own it, you're fine, but if you don't, tough luck. It's not that the game's broken or anything, they're just doing it to push newer titles out in the series. It's frustrating because it's actually a really good game that I remember playing a lot back in the day. Then there's Age of Empires 3 in October 2024. Microsoft straight up yanked it from online stores. On top of that, they shut down the multiplayer servers by the end of the month. Sure, you can still play offline if you already own it, but new players? Nope, not an option. Why? Because they want everyone to focus on the definitive edition, which is shinier, newer, and easier to sell. I get it, they're trying to modernize, but does that mean the original just has to disappear entirely? It makes no sense. Sony's doing even more damage to their company too, as they delisted Horizon Zero Dawn Complete Edition from Steam and Epic Game Store recently, all to make room for Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered. The remaster dropped on October 31st, 2024, but there's a catch. It's tied to a PlayStation Network account. Of course it is. So if you live in a region where PSN isn't widely available, you're out of luck. And honestly, it just feels like a money grab. They're essentially forcing players to upgrade to a new version where plenty of us were perfectly happy with the original and actually having a fun time with the game. And how about Lemnis Gate? This one really stings. It's a super unique turn-based shooter that got delisted in April of 2023, and by July the multiplayer servers were gone too. Console players can still mess around with local multiplayer or training modes, but if you were playing on PC, it's gone. Completely unplayable. Why? Low sales and player counts. I get that a game needs a community to survive, but it feels so final. It's not just the end of a game, it's the end of a whole concept, a whole experience. And once it's gone, it's like it never even existed in the first place. You know, it's not just about a few games disappearing, it's like entire chapters of our gaming history are being erased. Then there's F-Zero. Nintendo's high-speed racing franchise hasn't seen a new entry since 2004's F-Zero Climax in Japan, despite a dedicated fanbase clamoring for its return. Nintendo remains silent, and the older games are becoming increasingly difficult to access. Mega Man Legends is another casualty. The series took the beloved 2D character into a 3D action adventure format, but after the cancellation of Mega Man Legends 3 in 2011, the series has been dormant. The original games are rare and expensive, making it tough for new players to experience them. And let's not forget about the hardware itself. Consoles like the Sega Saturn or the Neo Geo are now collector's items with prices skyrocketing. Even if you find one, keeping it running is a challenge due to the scarcity of replacement parts. This hardware decay means that even if the games are preserved, the authentic experience of playing them as intended is becoming a rare privilege. This stuff keeps happening, and it's frustrating. These aren't just games, they're memories, history, pieces of what gaming has grown from. And every time a company decides to pull the plug, it feels like they're taking a part of that history with them. You know what's really frustrating about all this? It's like these companies don't even get it. For a lot of us, these games aren't just games. They're memories. They're moments in time. They're the things we grew up with. The stuff that shaped how we see gaming today. When they decide to yank a game off a store or shut down servers, it's like they're saying this doesn't matter anymore. But it does matter. It matters to all of us. I think what really gets me is how helpless it makes you feel. Like maybe you've been saving up to buy an old favorite again, or you heard about a game that you never got to play, and you're finally ready to dive in. And then BAM! It's gone. Just gone. Not because it stopped working, or not because people didn't like it, but because some exec decided it wasn't worth keeping around. And the worst part? There's nothing we can do about it. They hold all the keys and we're just stuck watching as they lock the doors behind us. And it's not just about nostalgia either, it's about preservation. Imagine if classic books or movies just disappeared because the publisher decided that it wasn't worth printing anymore. People would lose their minds! But with games, it's almost like no one in charge cares. They don't see them as something worth saving. Just products they can sell or stop selling whenever it suits them. What really stings though, is how it feels like a betrayal. We're the ones who supported these games when they came out. We bought them, we played them, shared them with friends. We built the communities that made these games iconic. And now, we're just left behind. It's like, thanks for your money, but we're done here. Move along. And yeah, maybe there's a new version coming out, or remaster, but it's never quite the same. It's not the game that we loved, it's the new version built for someone else. This is a constant reminder that we don't actually own the games we buy. They can be taken away, altered, or made unplayable at any time. And that sucks. It feels like we're losing control over something that's supposed to be ours, something that we're supposed to keep forever. So yeah, it's frustrating, it's heartbreaking, and honestly, it makes you wonder how much of what we love will even be left in another 10 years. But if you enjoy the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell for future notifications. The channel is growing immensely because of you guys, and I wanted to thank you guys for that. But I won't hold you guys here too long. Just let me know your opinions on Piracy below, because I would love to hear what your opinion on it and how we can sort of preserve video games going into the future. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.